Hi, bird. How are you doing? How are you doing?
Hello.
Hi. Do you know where Jill lives? Where's Jill? See you later. Hi.
Oh, hey. Hi. Where's your bike?
Oh, just down there. It's okay.
You sure?
Yeah,
Okay, there.
it's fine. The parakeet will look over it.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
Oh gosh, I hadn't expected that at all. I think it's a means to an end to tell our story. You know, I'm a great believer in capturing the eyes. It's always the eyes. And whatever species that we're helping, it's just phenomenal to see photographs as you capture their point of rescue through to their point of learning to trust the human species again and just to be calm and confident in the presence of human beings. So photography really can, bring out those images of success, I guess, in rescuing animals across the Asia continent and just make you happy that you've made a difference in their lives purely by looking in their eyes.
That's great. Jill Robinson. I've known you for a while. It's just me. It's just me. I'm moving my arms like a bit of a lunatic. Thank you so much for welcoming me to this part of the world, to your home. It's amazing. You're amazing. Feel free to blush as much as you like. It's a podcast. Nobody's going to see you.
I blush because the team makes up the core of the organisation.
Yeah.
Totally. We're so blessed. We have a fantastic team in whatever capacity. I think everyone talks about frontline staff, but it's much, much more than that.
Right.
It's everyone working behind the scenes. It's the boring areas of finance and IT which actually keep the organisation going. Mm-hmm. And our staff there need that total recognition for being the amazing guys that they are. Mm-hmm. So it's everybody in this organisation.
So just to fill you in a bit on the podcast, it's a podcast that starts with photography, but there are like essentially 4 or 5 main themes, right? One of the themes is creativity. One of the main themes is conservation, which is kind of how we know each other, why I'm here, why why I'm chasing after you, and thank you so much. One of the themes is leadership, like service leadership, which is what I do in my day job. And so what you're just describing right there in terms of all the people who help support the organization and everything, yeah, like I've definitely thought about it. We could dive into the stuff of what your experience has been like as a leader for not leader at the top of the pyramid, but think of it as a leader in a network, in a kind of on a scaffold, right? So on a scaffold, across the whole scaffold, at any point in time, somebody can show independent thinking or problem solving or whatever. Mm-hmm. So instead of a pyramid, that's an old model. Mm-hmm. This mindset is more like everywhere on this scaffold, people have to come up and assume leadership or whatever, right? Yeah. And so it takes the spotlight off of the celebrity leader with capital L.
Right.
And so finance, back office, admin, answering the phone, like all of that stuff is so important. And especially for Animals Asia, I know what conservation, how hard it is, because the stuff of it, the operation side is just fueled by goodness and caring, right? So, and I can see on your face that you're a good, caring person.
Well, that's nice of you to say. You don't think of those things, though. You just do it, right?
You just do it. You just do it. Exactly. Another thing about the podcast, my style of interviewing is not very good. So often people say, you don't really ask questions. And it's like, well, I talk, and then the other person says, I see.
Think. Okay. So then we just pop in and respond.
Listen, we're just going to have a chat.
Yeah.
So the first photograph is, in Hebrew, the word is ptsatsa, which is like a bomb.
Yeah.
It's a photograph at night of the back of a container. I think it's like at a stop of some sort. It's on the road. There's a car driving in. So it's that night scene, that in terms of the lighting. It's the back of a truck, and on the truck is a kind of a printed plastic canvas with Animals Asia logo on it, with a subtext of kindness in action. I know this photograph is amazing and important, so why don't you explain what this photograph is about?
Yeah, it's surreal, isn't it? It's just a truck by the look of it on the road, but it's anything but, because it contains a very precious cargo of bears inside, and it's one of 12 trucks on 3 different phases, which amounted to, 29 trucks. No, sorry, I'm sorry, 26, I think it was 9, 18... 25 trucks of bears over 3 different phases, rescuing 101 bears in total over each trip was 750 miles. So It was an incredible journey and quite the most ambitious thing that we have ever undertaken in the history of Animals Asia. And it was, going back to 2013 when we first were invited by a bear farm owner in Nanning in Guangxi province in China to work with him and close the bear farm that he was running down.
So what? He invited... Okay, so you're going to have to walk me through the history, which is therefore going to walk the listeners through the history of... Okay, so this guy owns a bear farm.
Yep.
And already bear and farm aren't words we were used to. And there's something fishy or something unusual or something. So explain what that's all about.
So bear bar farming began in actually North Korea in the early 80s. And it was a technique, if you like, that was learned by China in, again, the early mid-1980s, whereby bears were ostensibly saved from being caught in the wild and killed in the wild for their whole gallbladders, which is used in traditional Asian medicine. And the Chinese government figured that if you kept bears in tiny wire cages and milked them of their bile or extracted their bile and kept them alive at the same time, you could be saving their wild counterparts, which of course was a well-intentioned initiative, but not really working, because bear bar farmers, when their bears inevitably die as a result of the infection because of the crude bile extraction methods, they're still taking bears from the wild to supplement the bear bar farms. So it's an industry that we know can be replaced by herbs and by synthetics, that you don't need a bear in this day and age to perform the function that bear bile carries out on human health. Wow. So, but sadly it involves thousands of bears across the Asia continent, predominantly again in China, but also in Vietnam, a few farms in Laos and Myanmar as well. Wow. And it's just a topic that's very dear to the heart of Animals Asia. It's our founding goal to end bear bar farming. And we have done exactly that in Vietnam. Wow. And, we are working with the authorities in China to help protect as many bears as we can in the country and work towards the same conclusion as Vietnam.
Right. Okay. Let's rewind the tape, go back a few years in the time machine. You're living what country? When you first started, when you first got alerted to bear bile conservation, Animals Asia, what?
Hong Kong.
You're living in Hong Kong.
I came here in 1985, from the UK with my then husband, who's an airline pilot, and remained chairman of our board, so very good friends still to this day. But I've always loved animals ever since I was a kid, and when I came here, I immediately met someone that was walking his cat on the beach, and I thought he looked like an interesting guy. So I went over and said hello, and it turned out that he was the Asia representative for the International Fund for Animal Welfare. Oh, okay. And we got talking, and I'd always supported IFOR back in the UK, done fundraising for them. Oh, wow. So I just said, if ever you need a volunteer, I'd love to, work with you. And he did. And I started being a volunteer, and then I became a paid employee. And then when he left Hong Kong, I took over his job. Okay. So I was doing a lot of undercover investigations in the live animal markets of China, South Korea, the Philippines, and setting up programs like Dr. Dog here in Hong Kong in those early days.
Wow. Okay. So you're obviously a gifted underachiever. You're not ambitious in the least.
You know what? There's so many doors that open in animal welfare all the time.
Well,
The
unfortunately.
trick is not to take on too much, actually, because you could just be burning yourself out in a week by taking everything on. Right. And I think that's how we founded in 1998. I think we wanted to do everything to help every animal in the Asia continent. And we very quickly learned to focus on 3 main projects, which is how it turned out. Ending dog and cat eating, ending bear bar farming, and helping captive animals as much as we could.
Okay, wow. Okay, this podcast is a labor of love, and I essentially kind of look in the world and I say, who would be amazing to talk to? And then I go to them, and then it's a reflection of my interest. Right. And so anybody who listens to this podcast and they say, Rand, you say wow all the time. I was like, wow, because you're so amazing. Now, it's dumb. It's dumb to have this podcast because it's a podcast where the frame of the podcast is photographs. Yeah. Which is audio, which is visual. But the podcast is audio. Yeah. And the one thing that readers, listeners, can't see is your face. I wish I could show your face because you have the nicest face. Your smile is so nice. And okay, so the warmth is coming out and it's really, it's amazing. So let's get back to this because how long did it, so there were
101 bears.
101 bears.
Yeah.
What's the species?
Asiatic black bears or moon bears because of the beautiful yellow crescent on their chest. Okay. And this picture really moves me a great deal. It really makes me a mix of emotions because it's a sense of relief that after 8 years, of perpetual stress and overwhelming difficulties and, along the way for everybody in the team, we were finally able to bring those bears home.
How big is the team?
Oh, well,
rough
the
numbers.
whole team for Animals Asia, we've got over 300 staff members. So it's really mushroomed over I know, if you'd thought, there were 5 of us that started it in my room in Clearwater Bay Road, all those years ago, 23 years ago. And never did I think we would be at the extent that we are today.
Amazing.
But, it's been a huge journey. But this has been a chunk of our lives.
It's huge. I've always associated moon bears. I've been here since 2003. Because my interest leans into conservation, I've always kind of known of the work that you do. And that's always been a kind of a signpost or a flag, in terms of the moon bears. It's such a visual and not visual, but it's such an iconic sort of symbol for Animals Asia. And now, as you say, it took 8 years to get these 101 plus bears. I am sure it's such an achievement. But then, walk me through that moment when it was kind of clear that was the accomplishment. Like what you mean, like you're working, trying to get this to happen, and then finally the good news comes in. Yeah. When was that moment?
We just had so much red tape over the years because the facility was being taken over by different companies, and so the bears were caught up in what was a horticulture centre. So every time the facility got taken over, all of our agreements sort of went by the wayside, and we had to wait again and again and again for more officials to sign off. And they were sympathetic, there was no doubt about it, but it just was caught up, in bureaucracy. And I have to say, it was in April when we got finally the green light, and we actually got the green light last year, but then COVID hit. Right. So everything went back to square one. And I can't tell you, just being on that precipice of having the rescue, only to have the rug taken completely from under our feet again, was so morale damaging for the entire organisation, not just for the guys on the ground, but for everybody, because we had been waiting so long for that moment. And then suddenly in April, we finally got the paperwork. And I remember Boris, our China director, China's founding director, he just phoned me and he just said, guess what I've got in my hand, And I was like, oh my God. And I just sat down and absolute mush. You know, I think I swore terribly.
You're allowed to swear as much as you like, as terribly. By the way, a couple of things. I noticed that every time I say "wow," a pigeon shits.
Right.
So it's just like just on the side.
These are my rescued pigeons. So, the moment is indescribable because it was just a lightning bolt that went through the whole organisation.
Yeah.
That we had done it, and now we had to act quickly. You know, and I guess kudos to Ryan. I've got to say to Ryan and his whole team in Chengdu, the Bear and Vet team, for scrambling as they did. I mean, we've been preparing for this day for years and years, but to actually execute it is a different thing, you know, and to, you know, think about all the mechanics of moving a group of 29 bears, then another group of 29 bears, and then another group of, how many was it? 19 bears. Wow. It was just amazing, you know, to be thinking, how are we going to get those bears
How many
home?
bears per truck, per car, per container?
Four bears per truck.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's a lot of bird
it was
shit
a
coming
lot.
down because I keep saying down. Amazing.
Yeah, it was,
amazing.
and the whole thing was like 55 hours from you know, from going into the bear sheds that morning to loading them into the transport, and even loading them. You imagine coaxing bears that have been in cages all their life for bile extraction. You know, knowing the physical and psychological damage that has done to them.
Oh, okay.
And then asking them to go into another cage to be transported 750 miles back to our centre. You know, you think that would be an impossible task, but again, it's this exquisite organisation of Ryan and team that actually made this a positive experience for the bears. You know, feeding them with wonderful food, always in their transport cages, and making this a pleasurable outcome for them. You know, so they walk into the cage, they go, "Yep, what's happening? What have we got?" So that was phenomenal. You know, that they had the scaffolding. They had forklift trucks. They were moving bears up and down, you know, obviously from the bear cages down onto the floor, then moving them along to the trucks, more forklifts onto the trucks. And these most stressful circumstances for the bears, but all the time they were giving positive reinforcement and just making the bears' lives as, you know, comfortable as they could, you know, pre-journey and during the journey and post, obviously, loading.
Where is the destination?
The destination is our bear sanctuary in Chengdu.
Okay.
So we had already rescued 285 bears at that centre. And, you know, that was, we started doing that over 20 years ago. So we had a natural attrition rate of bears. And so we had the room to bring these 101 bears onto site. And now it's a whole new sanctuary. You know, a lot of the bear workers have never seen young bears. They've just been seeing old doddery guys that, you know, are playing in slow motion and needing a lot of medical care. And now they've got all these young juvenile bears that are going, yay, you know.
So what's the sad side of this story is this, you saved these bears, but has this created a kind of a pocket of demand where somebody else is going to come and say, "Oh, I can create a new bear farm"?
Absolutely not. No, this was the good thing about the bear farmer. He was a Buddhist when he took over the horticulture centre. He hadn't, you know, really known what bear farming was, and as soon as he did realise what it was, he was horrified. And he also had a very young daughter who saw the bears and was completely against the practice too. So that's why he contacted us, you know, it was unprecedented, and said, I want out of the industry. It's cruel.
Is this the end?
That's the end. The bear farm has closed down. It's closed for good. And so the horticulture centre just lives on without the bears now. So it's done. And that's what makes us feel even
you're amazing.
Happier. You
you're
know,
amazing.
that, well, no, there's still a long way to go.
Of
you know,
course.
there's thousands of bears that need help. But this was something that we wanted to do kindly and sensitively to show the government and the authorities that no one is going to be criticised, that no one's going to have the finger pointed at them, and that this bear farmer that gave up his bears was a hero. That we could do this without any bad PR and press for them, which we did.
It's amazing.
And people are seeing that on the internet, that we're just praising everybody that helped us to get those bears safely home.
Right. Amazing. Let's move on to the next photo.
Okay.
Do you want to do a jump to this one?
Yeah.
To this one? Or to this
So
one?
we can go to... That's Yeah, that's Ricky and Joey.
Okay.
That's hugging in their swimming pool in Vietnam. And I always love that one because it makes me think of two old men at the pool bar, just just having a good time with a beer. It's
Okay, so
I think if they were people, they would have a glass of Heineken in their hands
Nice.
and just be saying cheers to everyone.
let me describe the photograph. So it's a portrait, a warm portrait, as you say. There are two males.
Yeah.
Two male bears. One of them they're both kind of like palling around with an arm around the shoulder of the other. They're both kind of like, sure enough, looking like they're at a bar, sort of like cheering on some game. One of the guys, his mouth is kind of closed and he's just kind of sitting there going, yeah, all right. And the other one's giving him a nice bear hug. And sorry about the terrible pun. And they're half submerged in water. The enclosure looks artificial. Is that like a natural enclosure? Is that like...
It's natural substrates, but
Okay.
of course it's an enclosure.
Okay,
so,
got it.
Yeah.
So they're basically... So it's like a pond. They're in the water. They look really relaxed. There's grass behind them with a couple of boulders. And there's some grass in the foreground that's a bit out of focus. And the bears are looking at, I guess, the photographer, really sweet-faced. And as you describe, okay, these are compared to the black bears, grizzly bear. They seem a little smaller.
A little, yeah.
Their faces are. It looks like a muzzle, but their ears are nice and little pom-pom ears. They're jet black animals, but as you described, they have this nice little white. What's the word?
Crescent.
There
Like
we
a
go.
moon.
Okay,
Moon
like
bear.
a moon. Assume
Yeah.
I'm an idiot. I don't know.
No,
Okay, yeah,
no.
like a crescent. And it's the sweetest. It's the sweetest
Yeah.
photograph because one of them's holding. He's just giving him like a nice sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are their names? And you given the names.
Yeah, we got Ricky and Joey
Ricky
there.
and Joey.
So what I love about that picture again is, remember I said it's always about the eyes, and
Yeah.
you can just see that calm contentment now,
Yeah.
which is so drastically different from how we rescue them from
Right.
the bear bar farms, where they are off their heads with fear. There's no question
Oh,
because
wow.
they can't tell the difference between us or the farmers that are going to be taking their bile. So the presence of a human means
Right.
a bad thing,
Right.
generally.
And are they caged from cubhood, from early
Yep.
on?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely,
Wow.
they
So
are.
is that all they
Absolutely.
know?
That's their life. That's their life. No free access to food or water ever.
Or movement?
No toys. No movement. Hardly any movement. No freedom to
No sky.
stretch properly or stand up.
Right.
On bipedally as they often do on their back legs.
Yeah.
No choices in their life at
Right,
all except
right.
to lie on hard, unrelenting bars of a bear bar cage, and that's it. So the difference here is just, and you're right, the ears, we call them our Mickey Mouse bears because,
Sure.
of course, they've got the biggest ears of all the other species of bears for a start. And they have to be the most forgiving of species. They just have to be because we would never be that forgiving if
Right.
that had happened to us. So, yeah, it's far, it's light years from how they've come in the past, and that's why these pictures are really worth celebrating, and these are the pictures that are compelling people to work with us and support us and celebrate the end of bear farming.
It's hard for me not to look at this and not feel emotionally moved. From your face, from this, also the description, it's one of these things where you're like, oh, the cruelty of it. And yet, there's no finger pointing really that you can do at any point. Really,
Right.
Can you?
Right.
Like.
Well, no, I mean that's not the way we operate.
Sure.
Of course, we have our deep concerns about the industry, and I think that's one good thing about Vietnam is that the government have really recognised the industry for what it is. You can't humanely extract the bile from a living sentient animal.
No.
You cannot.
No.
You're invading their whole system.
course.
You're puncturing their abdomens and their gallbladders, either with a 6-inch spinal needle to extract the bile, or you're actually physically cutting in and creating a fistula or a hole
Wow.
into their abdomen and gallbladder.
Wow.
So there are several ways of bile extraction, but they are all invasive, and
For
they will
sure.
all ultimately kill every single on a bear bar
Yeah,
farm
yeah.
every time.
Yeah, yeah.
The consequences that we see from incredible psychological as well as physical
For sure.
issues is
Sustained
indescribable.
torture, right?
It's indescribable.
So,
yeah. So it's something that they've only known through decades of their life if they live that long.
Right.
You know, so by the time that we rescue them, we call them our broken bears.
Sure.
They're just totally broken.
Oh, for sure. So you're surrounded by companion animals. You understand companion animals as well, right? Mm-hmm. So dogs and cats, and you, for somebody who has that as a frame of reference. Okay, let's start with somebody who doesn't have dogs or cats and doesn't understand that these are sentient animals they all have personalities, they all have identities, they all have senses of self and places in the world.
Yeah.
And clearly a bear, well, to me, I say clearly, because to me it's not a leap to make this notion of sentience with a bear who, as you describe, has only known caged life. Then somehow you come in and through your intervention, slowly but surely, they start smelling these new people, seeing these new people, that's disrupting a little bit their everyday. And yet, have you participated in that moment of transition where all of a sudden they start seeing like, hey, wait a second, the game is changing?
Hundreds of times.
Wow.
We've rescued over 600 bears. So it's, every bear is different. Like we're different. Mm-hmm. Every bear has different characteristics and personalities. And you've got to just wend your way through those personalities and figure out who they are. There was a very amazing woman many years ago. She died of breast cancer. Her name was Elsa Paulson. And she wrote a book called Smiling Bears because she, like every single one of us that works with bears, recognised that bears, like dogs, smile. They deliberately turn their mouths up into a grin when they're having fun. And that's not me being anthropomorphic. It's us saying fact as it is with these animals. And so Elsa always said, as we always say to the bears, who are you and what can I do for you?
Oh, wow. So
you recognise each individual character and personality and you try to figure out how you can help them best in their journey after arriving from a bear bar farm. And, you're going to get bears that after even a few days are going to be recognising their environment as something wonderfully exquisite and embracing. Right. And you're going to get other bears that are deeply suspicious because they are so badly hurt
and
they're
traumatized.
Right, exactly. We use the word exactly the same time.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
It's clear trauma. So how do you treat, like, if I were to take a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old and torture them, like as a kid,
right,
and then save them,
and
then put them in through a process of, okay, well, let's rehabilitate you. So with a human being, we have a imperfect, but we have an understanding of when you're dealing with this kind of trauma, how to start, opening the crack in the door so they can sort of see that light coming through or whatever. So what is that like with a bear in terms, like I can imagine, like I've dealt with animals that are clearly traumatized, and each one, I mean, that has the wound. Some are going to respond more positively than not. Yeah. And you're beginning to experience a typical Rand question. Where's the fucking question? But so the question is, with a bear, can you give us an example of a moment where it is a literal breakthrough in their traumatic?
Yeah, I guess it turns from fear to curiosity. Because what you're doing, first of all, as you rightly say, Ran, about, kids and things, if you're dealing with high trauma, you want to make them feel comfortable. You need to remove their pain. You need to fill their bellies. Right. You need to do things that comfort and reassure them that the human species isn't so bad after all. And that's our job in the first few days and weeks, is simply to remove their pain. And that in itself is a huge, huge problem because, as I said, they're broken in so many ways, whether it's they've had teeth deliberately cut back. So you can imagine the roots of their teeth being exposed and the pulp and all that makes it just so painful even to eat. Their gallbladders have been interfered with, their abdomens have been compromised. their hearts have been stressed because of stress. Very
Sure.
often we are dealing with dilated aortas, for example, and a million other things resulted to stress, like eye trauma, again, can be related to high blood pressure,
Right.
but it can also be related to the food, that they're not getting enough vitamin E, and also the infection travelling around their
Sure.
bodies that often reaches their eyes and disables their eyes as well.
wow.
So there's a ton of things that we just need to look at each bear and figure out where do we start? Where do we start first of all? So we remove the pain through various procedures and surgeries.
Sure.
And it could be multiple surgeries, to deal with a lot of different aspects. Psychologically, of course, the feeding of the animals, to give them food that they've never even thought of, let alone tasted, on the bear bar farms, and even that knocks them out of their comfort zone.
Right.
When you give them a whole smorgasbord of fruit or
Like a
something,
banana.
and
They're
they're
like,
like, wow, that they because they've had gruel, literally
Sure.
porridge congee on bear bar farms for
Oh, wow.
all of their lives, generally, until you give them something that a bear should eat. And, and even then, if you're giving them something perhaps highly acidic and they've got tooth problems,
Right.
when they're trying to eat that, then the acid is causing them discomfort of the mouth.
Yeah.
So all of that sort of thing has to be gauged and looked at, and, how can we provide you with the most comfort, until we can remove your pain and get you feeling trust again.
So let's go back to Ricky and Joey. How long after their introduction to one another was this photograph made?
Oh gosh, I can't tell you. I can't remember. Every bear again is different. The integration is very, very complex.
Right.
It's like us.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get on with people, sometimes we don't, and bears are exactly the same. They're a solitary species in the wild.
Okay.
So it's not a case of just throwing them all together in
Sure.
lovely groups like dogs, perhaps, that might get it on better in a pack.
Right.
Bears are not pack animals
Right,
at
right.
all. So it's trial and error. So you're
Right.
putting them into dens after you've got all the issues,
The medical stuff.
put away, then you're putting them in dens next to each other, so they're within the sight, the sound, and the smell. And indeed the touch. They can be
Okay,
putting their
yeah.
paws through the bars of the cage,
Yeah.
and sometimes they can just be patting each other gently, on the bodies, on the faces. Sometimes they can be lashing out, and you realise that's not a very good fit, so you're just changing the animals around and pairing them up based on their level of interaction with each other and how much they want to interact. And sometimes you would never see a success. We've had
Sure.
a couple of female bears that absolutely just want their own company and no one else.
Look, it's like with dogs. Some dogs are just so traumatized that they'll never really chill.
Yeah.
But in the same way, I mean, just like people do.
And here is lovely because we're just with the Nanning bears that we've just rescued and brought back. The integration is starting now.
Oh, nice!
And it's so beautiful. It's just.
I hope there's somebody somewhere
there
capturing this into a really moving
there is.
film.
Yeah, we've got two bears just yesterday that were introduced. One called Pickle Nickel, who belongs to Downton Abbey actress Mrs. Patmore, Leslie Nichol, and that's her bear. And then we've got another bear called Wilberforce. And Pickle Nickel has been posturing herself outside of Wilberforce's den area and, siding up to the bars and rubbing herself against the bars and rolling on her back and really posturing in a very positive position, in front of Wilberforce. And they were just integrated, and it was the sweetest hello for both of them. And they haven't stopped playing and indeed mating since.
Nice.
So, even though the boys are castrated,
what are you gonna do? You know what I mean?
It's still hardwired,
So for sure.
and it's it's mating season, and the girls are open to a bit of company, and it's just wonderful, and the only thing that breaks my heart is that they've waited 8 years, for that moment, and now suddenly the spring is in their hearts.
Nice. Well, nice way of putting it. So, we see two human beings, two females of our species. One is holding what looks like a blood pressure monitor. Actually, there are three people. So one person is holding what seems to be a metallic sort of portal into some cages. And then the farthest person away, we don't see her face, It looks like female hands, is pushing a syringe, like a thick syringe of liquid. Looks like food that the snout of a bear is licking at behind bars. The rest of the image is all metal, so it's metal gray, except for the portal into this cage has been painted red, which on an aesthetic level is kind of like, okay, it's a funny choice. What am I looking at? Because this looks like a bear behind a cage. It looks very grim. It's fluorescent lighting. It looks like it's a warehouse of some sort of industrial building. So it doesn't look very soft.
Right.
So what is this?
It is a miracle. What you're looking at is a miracle. You are looking at Sarah and Kelly, our vet manager, senior manager, and our vet nurse, who are taking blood pressure of a fully conscious bear in his den. And so the bear is Joey.
Oh, okay.
And this is training, and this is trust at its most heightened level, to show that a bear that has previously been caged, been compromised, been hurt in the past is now at the stage, at the level to which he is totally entrusting his arm to put into a sleeve, a blood pressure sleeve,
okay,
to be able to feel that pressure on his arm, not know what it's all about, but just to be so trusting of those girls that he allows it to happen.
And enough to eat.
And enough to, of course, it's all about positive reinforcement.
For sure.
So you can see Sarah, who's got huge syringes full of yogurt and condensed milk and yummy things.
Nice.
That is totally distracting him.
Right.
But, there's no question. He can feel the cuff because, we've all had blood pressure taken.
Sure.
It's quite tight, right?
Sure.
So, and this is the first successful blood pressure reading that has been given to a bear that I'm sure in Asia, but possibly even the world, it's just remarkable to see this happening.
So what I described and projected was a very... it's interesting when you think about it, that we've got these... are they wearing the...
Well, you're looking at a clinical environment there.
Clinical setting,
So it's not, this is a den. We've got to keep bears safe from people.
Sure.
We've got to keep people safe from bears. So, they have to have dens that are made of steel, reinforced steel,
And it's actually an image of hope.
Yeah.
As opposed to what I was, I was projecting. Right. But luckily you're here to decode the image.
Yeah.
Because it's as you say, it's so positive.
Well, Joey is loving it.
Yeah.
Obviously the girls are loving it because
Right.
they're getting a successful blood pressure reading.
Yeah.
And it just shows again that symbol of trust after so many years on a farm.
How recent was this image made?
Just a few weeks ago.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, there are other trials that are going on. So, taking blood from a fully conscious bear as well.
Okay.
You imagine being punctured in your arm.
For your first time.
Exactly. Just, and not moving that arm. I promise you the bears are not even twitching. They're just so focused on the positive side of the food that they're getting.
Yeah.
And the trust between them and their carers, that they don't care what's going on
Right.
the other end. So even things like nail trimming. So
Sure.
to avoid an anaesthetic,
Yeah.
if a nail is growing particularly long and is at risk of growing over and puncturing the pad,
Sure.
our team can go in there, do exactly the same process, distract the bear with something yummy, and then cut the claws as
Wow.
well. So,
Wow. Which is such an unnatural notion for a wild animal.
Right.
Right? Because the risk or the sort of the danger of somebody listening or watching or whatever is to think, it's like a dog. So, you trim the nails and everything.
Right,
These are wild animals.
Yeah.
So, which makes it even more amazing to have that trust built for the, as you described.
Well, it helps us to help them,
Sure.
even having the monthly bear checks, so to get them to come to the front of the dens and stand. So that, for food, so that, one of the vet can be standing there with a torch and can be looking at everything from
Right.
eyes to mouth to abdomens, where you often see maybe even the first signs of liver cancer, example, from masses or swellings in the abdomen and everything in between, that you can do a full body check while the bear is standing in front of you. And of course we have health checks every couple of years on every single
For
bear
sure.
as well. So where we anaesthetize them and bring them into surgery. But
But still,
this is a great way of, if you've got a bear that you're worried about, with hypertension or something, taking their blood pressure consciously saves on anaesthetic and is just a terrific outcome because you can just get their BP.
Sure. So great. So I know that these wins, these achievements are hard won because you just told me, but also because it's part of the stuff of conservation is that you recognize that the world needs to move over to a whole new reality,
right.
so that we can protect these animals, sometimes leave them alone, let alone get involved with them.
Yeah. Yeah, we're doing them a huge disservice. You know, bears by taking their bile, rhinos by taking their horn, tigers by taking their bones.
Sure.
We are doing them a huge disservice.
Well,
and I think our footprint now is just so heavy on this earth that we're, you know, this is dangerous territory now, you know, because we obviously need them as part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
You know, bears are a keystone species out there in the environment. I mean, one of the first things that one of our bears did last week when we released him onto grass for the first time ever,
Oh, wow.
was to dig. You know, and this is obviously helping the environment. It's aerating the soil.
Sure.
You know, they're involved, of course, in seed dispersal. You know, it's just in keeping our forests and our waters healthy. Sure. You know, by eating carrion and dead animals and fishing, and you know, so it's our livelihood we need to protect, as well as the bears and the other species that we are custodians of, if you like. You know, and custodian doesn't mean dominion. I think that people think in the biblical sense that dominion means you've got all power over every single animal. Actually, I tend to believe that it's a nurturing effect. You know, we've got to live in harmony with these species and protect them, so for the good of them and humankind.
Wow. Okay. Whew, it's a lot. It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. I knew you're amazing. I knew it was going to be like full on, and you delivered. Thank you. These bears. Yeah. Well, let's move on to another. I think it's the fourth photo. So in this photograph, need a bit of a palate cleanser in a way. Just to kind of get my mind around this. Okay, so it's a photograph of what looks to be a restaurant and it could be actually a food stall in a wet market. The photograph is it's of a restaurant, and on the top there's like an ad for, could be a can of cane juice or beer, and then there are 4 photographs of bowls of soup. One of them is like a yellow broth, one is a red broth, so you think a bit spicy. One of them is like a kind of a darker brown curry, and then another red one of, inside I can just make out frog legs and some chilies. And then compositionally it's nothing to talk about. But the content, I don't know. I don't read Chinese characters. I don't know what this is about. So why don't you walk us the who, what am I looking at?
You're looking at a restaurant in Guangzhou, in Guangdong province, where, as you say, those dishes are all on display for the public to see. But what you're also seeing when you're talking about the Chinese writing is that there are some symbols there that have been blocked out, if you can see in the middle there. Okay. And that's dog meat.
Okay, that one character is for dog.
Right, exactly. So that is a restaurant that has complied with the new regulations in China to stop selling dog and cat meat as food for the table. So it's a very symbolic picture.
Okay, so that
we don't need to see we don't need to see the dog suffering or the cats being butchered, but that one picture is so profound that it shows a very good observation of China's livestock list, removing those species from the list this time last year.
Oh, wow. Okay. So the rest is just various dishes. Yeah. And this, so what it is,
no more dog.
So as you pointed out, under each photograph is like a byline, I guess, just sort of saying this is what it is. So this is like blah 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 curry, and this is whatever. And then, as you say, somebody taped over the characters. So the characters are in yellow, and somebody taped over probably with yellow electrical tape or something. just saying, well, it's soup, but it's got no dog in it.
Right.
Got it.
Right, exactly. And this is something, of course, that we celebrate now because it was another one of our founding goals of Animals Asia to end dog and cat consumption in China. Wow. And I'm not sure that any of us believed that day would happen, but it sure did in May of last year.
Oh.
And, I think the world, when they saw the headlines, they thought somehow that China had kowtowed to the West, because of how we think about companion animals, right. And that we sometimes laugh about people in China. They eat everything with 4 legs except a table and everything with wings except an aeroplane. And it's a very bad and offensive joke.
Sure.
And it's not true.
Yeah.
In fact, the Chinese government rose to this level of removing dogs and cats from the livestock list as a direct result from their comments of dogs helping society across the world and being good for humankind.
Sure.
So it was a real celebration at every, level of that action.
Right.
And, we're going to see pushback from the industry. We're not going to see the industry ended overnight. We know that. But we do know that the holistic approach of the programs that Animals Asia has been running in China, actually since before Animals Asia was founded, when I was first there in the mid-1980s, we know that those programs have led, or helped the government to make that decision and help the general public, more importantly, perhaps,
right.
to accept that decision as
right.
well in the main.
Okay.
We all know there's an animal boom of dogs and cats in China. People wanting to bring dogs and cats into their community
right.
as friends now.
Okay.
Today. We
okay.
know that customs officials are using dogs all the time. We know that there's guide dogs for the blind in China. So there's a huge embracing, if you like, of dogs and cats in the community.
Is that what was missing all along?
This is something that culturally we have to recognise that people of my age have lived through tragedy in China.
Yeah.
So with the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, how could you talk about loving animals
right.
when 40 million
Survival.
people were dying of starvation across the country?
Sure.
So, this is something that dogs and cat owning was seen as bourgeois in the early days.
Yeah.
You really couldn't talk to your neighbours about taking
right.
dogs into your hearts or anything.
Right,
but
right.
now it's a complete turnaround. I remember being in China in the 80s when there was one animal welfare group that we supported
right.
Before Animals Asia. And now there's about 250 or more
yeah.
animal welfare groups
yeah.
that are really passionate across
sure.
the country. And it's these sort of programs that we're setting up, working with the local NGOs, improving shelters,
right.
bringing programs like Dr. Dog into hospitals and disabled centres and Professor Paws into schools.
Right.
That you had Karina, our
yeah.
education
yeah.
director,
yeah.
she was talking about these programs.
Do you have those programs as well in China? Or those
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
oh.
absolutely, we do, and they're embraced,
yeah.
and people can't get enough of them.
Great ambassadors.
It's wonderful, and
sure.
there's even sort of scientific reserves in China talking about the beneficial effects of sharing our company with dogs and cats.
Yeah.
That they're good for our immune system.
Right.
They reduce our blood pressure levels.
Sure.
And our cholesterol levels, etc., etc. So there's very China thrives on science and on
sure.
paper.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing is really important, and that's the sort of thing that we can work with them on to prove
sure.
that a dog going into hospital is going to be good for a patient's physical and psychological
Absolutely.
health. There's no question.
Okay, let me shift tracks a little bit. You've been doing this for a long time. Don't be shy, don't be afraid of this word. You've got a certain mastery of not the subject, but of the practice of conservation, right? I know it's a funny thing to kind of accept. Don't take it as a label. Okay, so you have this fed from your experience so that when you're faced with the crux or a crisis or a challenge, that mastery and that experience lets you look at the situation with a lot more information, so you can kind of see, for example, things are a lot more complex. You don't have the knee-jerk reaction, right? And so let's imagine somebody who is anywhere but Asia, who is having these. I grew up in Quebec, in Montreal and Quebec, right? The pretense is that these really horrific things about animal cruelty happen in Asia like nowhere else. Wait a second, in Quebec they're horrific puppy farms.
Absolutely.
Right? So in other words, how do we shift that focus to give either advice or knowledge or insights to somebody to say, okay, think about as a conservationist, wherever you are, what is the mindset that you can sort of help them to kind of break outside of their bias or break outside of their...
Yeah. It's huge. It's huge. And I mean, you're so right, Ran. You know, live animal markets, they've still got live animal markets in the US, you know, that they should be closing down yesterday, you know, because this sort of, obviously everything that the pandemics that we're seeing, every pandemic virtually that we've seen has been as a result of our unkindness to animals. So if the animal welfare is not compelling, surely the human welfare has got to be compelling, and that we are, you know, really destroying our species on this planet because of the egregious way that we're treating animals. So we've got to look at this in a different way and do things differently. There's no question about that. And you've only got to go, you know, look at all the freedom foods, if you like, that you see for sale in the supermarkets, all the ones with the green label, etc. And then remember all the exposés of the undercover, you know, when they go undercover into slaughterhouses, etc. Even those green meats that you're buying are still victims of horrible cruelty in those slaughterhouses, you know, because the exposés speak for themselves. It's why, you know, the US, for example, are trying to introduce or have introduced ag-gag laws, you know, gagging of those cameras, preventing cameras in those facilities so the general public can't actually see the reality of what happens. And I find that so distasteful and so offensive to the animals, you know, who these slaughterhouses contain.
For sure.
So yeah, I mean, we should have those cameras there for every, you know, as a moral template, if you like, to show how the animals are treated, or to at least encourage better treatment, or indeed to encourage more people to become at least gradually plant-based, or as much as they can. This earth is not going to sustain the level that we're eating meat today.
So there's this notion of, I was talking about this with a friend, right? Like, so Robert Sapolsky, he's a neuroscientist who wrote the most incredible book. He has a whole chapter on this notion of how in our brains we have this immediate sort of reflex that is so fast of dividing things in terms of groups of us versus them. Okay, so let's say that us can be, you're in a room full of women, and then a guy steps in. So the us, all of a sudden the guy comes in, there's your brain reacts so fast. It's like faster almost than your awareness, right? So we can have that us versus them in everything. And so us can be, Westerners versus Chinese. Oh yeah, the thems, those Chinese, what are they doing with the dogs, and what are they doing with you know, it's so cruel and all this stuff. It's like, yeah, but wait a second, as you say, let's look in our backyard.
Absolutely.
Look at the social lives of chickens or cows or whatever. Yeah. There's a question. We'll get there. Don't worry, just hang in there. So, what's amazing to me is that you came here, you started partnering with this group, you started you continued your activation as a conservationist. Now, obviously, these seeds were sown inside you very young, very early on. What was that with you as a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old? Like, what kind of 10-year-old were you that came home with kittens and puppies?
Yeah, I wasn't really allowed to. You know, my mum died when I was a baby. My father brought my sister and I up for a few years. We lived with an auntie and uncle. We never really were allowed to be around animals, even though my auntie tells me that when I was, you know, a toddler, I would cross the road just to stroke a dog or a cat, so she had to keep me on reins. Otherwise, I was going to get splattered in the road. So
reins is a leash.
Leash. It's a leash. I had a leash. I did. And so it was inherent. I know that.
Yeah.
I know I loved animals before I could say the word animal.
Sure.
I absolutely know that.
Yeah.
Without a shadow of a doubt. I was the baby that threw dolls out of the pram but loved teddy bears.
Right.
And I've got pictures of myself with teddy bears and stealing my sister's teddy bears. So I know that there was something inherent there, and which you can never explain.
So jump to 15 years old.
Yeah.
Well, how did that manifest?
I started to work for a vet.
Okay.
I was allowed to go down to the local vet and after school and in school holidays, which I absolutely loved.
Yeah.
And I worked in a cattery in school holidays, cleaning out cat shit for, you know, weeks on end for nothing, for a pittance. And I wanted to be a vet nurse, or a vet actually.
Yeah.
And I flunked physics and chemistry at school. So I knew that I was never going to be intelligent enough to be a vet. So that was very crushing. But I never lost my love of animals.
Right.
And so when I came to Hong Kong and met, this guy that represented an animal welfare group, I was just beside myself. And I just knew, this is my niche. This is what I want to do.
How old were you at the time?
Oh, I was in my about 25 when I
25.
came over to Hong Kong, yeah.
Nice. Now, I'm like you in which there is no division between companion animals, like domesticated pets, and wild animals, although I don't project pet ownership on these animals.
Right.
In the same way, so how was your conservation expanded from companion animals to wild animals, and what can we give to the listener in terms of what they can do themselves to start getting involved, to expand from their homes where they may have a pet?
Right. Oh gosh, I think it's just again in our habits, what we eat, what we put on our face, what we read about, how we live our lives. My leap to conservation, if you like, from I originally I said to you, I investigated the live animal markets, and I was absolutely horrified to see bags and bags of dried animal parts, including bear paws, sacks of bear paws in those early days, and pangolin scales and tiger penises and even a rhino horn. I've got pictures in southern China.
Guangzhou,
In Guangzhou,
yeah.
of course, everyone. Qingping Market was famous there for the most awful things. And it was just then a wake-up call of thinking that this was all quack medicine, and realising very quickly when I was talking to Chinese medicine doctors that it wasn't quack medicine, that there's a real belief in these products and a belief in harmony with nature. Right. And that was where I think I sort of got a real education, because when they talk about harmony with nature, suddenly doctors were talking to me and saying bear farming isn't harmony with nature. It may be using their bile, but actually the way they're treated on the bear farms and the way their bile is extracted couldn't be far removed from traditional medicine. Sure. And how it should be, portrayed, if you like, and worked through. But they also gave me another surprise, that bear bile works in traditional medicine terms, and then I found out that it works in Western terms as well. So it contains ursodeoxycholic acid, or UDCA, which actually was then replicated in the 1950s, synthetically in a laboratory. And it was sold by the ton across the world, but it wasn't using bears.
Right.
And so knowing that, and then knowing from the Chinese doctors that, you could easily replace bear bile with herbs and with synthetics, then I knew that I could be brave and go out there in the community and start maybe, on programs that would reverse that cycle of cruelty for bears and show communities how incredible this species was in their own right, rather than how much they protect humankind or help humankind as well. So it was that leveraging, if you like, and that's what I think we can all do, in our day-to-day lives. Getting back to your, the crux of your question, I think, is just looking at the food we put in our mouths, looking at the medicine that we ingest, and just reflecting on is it kind?
Okay.
That's it. Yeah. Asking every day, what can I do to be kind?
Oh, wow.
Random acts of kindness as well really make you feel better as a person, and things that you don't get any reward for. Sure. Of course.
Well, there's a psychic reward of just being not being a douche, of being a nice person. Right. Jill, thank you so much. Look, we've sat for a long time now, and I really appreciate it. Can we make a photograph that will... We'll both be sweaty.
Okay.
I promise to make you look fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is so great.
Ran, thank you for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it